interesting. You made the distinction between the first Intifada as a relatively peaceful one, but there were lots of lives that were lost and lives of the Palestinians, not so much the Israelis. The second one was a much more violent Intifada, and that brought political factors into it, especially the Palestinian Authority, I mean, Arafat and so forth. So there was a difference, and there was much more violence. There was much more violence when it came to the second Intifada. But the second Intifada would never have happened if Oslo hadn't happened, meaning that they took the first Intifada seriously and said, okay, there's resentment to us. We're not supposed to be there. Common sense tells us that we're occupying land that doesn't belong to us. Oslo Agreement was a cheat, where Europe cheated the Palestinians. And that's how the anger developed. And it was easy to mobilize the street for the second Intifada. And that's how the violence went as bad as. Can you comment on that? That's something that's lots of people know about, but for a historical perspective from you would be very helpful.
Ranjan, I did mention, of course, that the first uprising created this impression that maybe there is a chance for diplomacy to end the occupation. I mentioned it in my lecture. Only for the Palestinians to learn that actually diplomacy was used to allow the Israelis to continue the occupation, if you want, by other means. In fact, under the guise of a peace process. But I think you're absolutely right. One has to even go deeper in a more profound way and explain what happens when you raise the hopes of people that it was beneficial and it was the right thing not to use too much violence as part of the resistance in order to change the reality, only to learn that actually because it was not violent enough, if you want, it did not produce the necessary end of the occupation. And this is one of the reasons that you can see how these kinds of things escalate as the years go by. Namely, you are using nonviolence means, you are being cheated by the West, as you rightly say, Ranjan, that you would be rewarded for this, and finally the occupation would end. That doesn't happen. So you're far more frustrated as part of the resistance movement. And then we have this terrible cycle. The more violent the resistance is, the more violent the Israeli reaction to the resistance is. It gives them license in their own eyes to actually escalate their own actions and use methods which probably in the past they were more cautious in using. I'm not surprised that when the last desperate Palestinian act on the 7th of October came, when everything that they have attempted from 87 to 2023 did not produce an end for the oppression, I was not surprised that the Israelis said to themselves, okay, that kind of level of desperation, that kind of action, and of course, this action developed the way it did on the 7th of October, not only because of a particularly well-planned program by the Palestinian resistance or by Hamas. Things got out of order with unknown and unforeseen, I think, elements. And we still don't know exactly what happened on the 7th of October, namely, for instance, how many people were killed by the Israeli army, actually, and how many people were killed by the Palestinian who went over the fence. But that doesn't matter. It's not relevant for what we are talking here. What is important, that level of desperation gave the Israelis the assumption, or produced the assumption, that they can escalate their actions in comparison to what they did in 2000, in what they did in 1987, and what they had done in 1948, namely using genocide properly as a means of responding to the Palestinian resistance. And of course, fulfilling a much more profound strategic objective of trying to get rid of Gaza as a strip, as a people, as a territory, as a geopolitical unit. And this is the cycle that is so depressing, because we can see in the future, if everything that we are talking about today, which people call the day after, would not produce any significant change in the reality, despite the fact that I counted, I think up to now, 1,500 Palestinian political prisoners have been released as a result of the prisoners exchange. But next to it, you have to look at the total destruction of Gaza, the ethnic cleansing inside the Gaza Strip, the terrible things that are happening in the West Bank, especially in the last month. If all that is not going to end by the so-called renewed, I don't know, peace plan by Trump, French-Egyptian initiative with the Saudis and the Turks to revive the two-state solution, and I'm afraid to say that all these efforts are doomed to fail. There is no doubt that Intifada number four, if we can call it that way, if we relate to 7th of October as the third Intifada, would be as desperate as Intifada number two and number three, and the Israeli reaction accordingly would be even an escalation of what they have done in Gaza. Namely, they probably would allow themselves to do similar things in the West Bank. And who knows, also towards the Palestinian minority inside Israel. Therefore, of course, this is not inevitable. I don't take a deterministic view about it. I'm just saying that this is one possible trajectory. I do hope that what we are doing, what everyone else is doing, can prevent this trajectory. But we have to be realistic that if nothing would be done effectively, this is not an unlikely scenario. I will end by saying that yesterday I gave a talk to a large group of Palestinian citizens of Israel who asked me, "Do you think that what happened in Gaza can happen to us?" And the last thing you want to say is yes. Of course, you use all the caveats to say, "Who am I to tell you what's going to happen? I'm not a prophet. I don't have a crystal ball." But on the other hand, you do have a responsibility of someone who does know how to analyze the situation, of someone who knows very well the ideology that informs the Israeli military and political elite. And these are people whose lives are in danger because of that. So you have a responsibility to say to them, this is not totally unlikely. I used very careful words when I talked about it. But I did not say to them, "Oh, don't worry, you are safe. This will never happen to you, the 2 million Palestinians who are officially citizens of Israel." I said, "No, I cannot assure you that this is not what happened in Gaza will not happen in the Galilee or the Nakab." I said, "I hope that we are all of us, in whatever capacity, will find a way to prevent it. But it would be irresponsible to say that this is not a possible scenario."
I have one more question. You referred to October 7th as maybe the third Intifada. What is the reality? Was it or was it not being prepared for a fairly long time? And did or did not the Israelis know at all? Were they actually caught by surprise, or was this a theater being played out and something that Israel needed to do what they did in Gaza?
I hope the Israelis are not faking the documents. I believe they don't, probably. Recently, they've begun to release the documents they have found in Gaza of the Hamas command was actually quite pedantic in writing the minutes of the meeting throughout the last 2 years. It was planned from 2022 onwards, not before 2022. That's what comes out from the documents that the Israelis are releasing. And you see two very clear motives and one clear operation, which was not fully executed because nobody predicted the way 7th of October occurred. And I will mention two things that were not known to the Hamas and happened. So one thing was very clear. You have to remember that Sinwar felt very bad about the fact that he was released in the Gilad Shalit exchange deal. And it was a very famous thing he said to the prisoners. He said, "I will release all of you. I promise you. He said to them, and he writes, it's written in the documents, he said, the moment I returned to Gaza, the main reason I wanted to be the commander is because I want to fulfill my promise to you. And you can understand, he felt bad that he was released and the others stayed behind. So one very clear motivation was to abduct as many people as possible in order to get the release. Now, he naively thought that if he was released with 995 other people for one Israeli soldiers, that if they take 25 Israeli soldiers, that would be even quicker, because the Gilad Shalit exchange took 5 years. Now, I don't think he realized that the Netanyahu government would not care about the soldiers. That is something they did not take into account. Nor did he take into account how easily the fence would break, and so many people who are not part of the structure, namely ordinary citizens, would cross into Israel and take hostages by their own initiatives, and take everyone they see, old women, babies, and children. This is not something they planned. This got out of hand. There's no doubt about that, and it created a very different kind of reality of prisoners exchange. It was not soldiers vis-a-vis political prisoners. Now it was a civilian population, and it's against international law, even if you are a liberation movement, to abduct people. That should be clear. You're not. The international law is very clear about that. Of course, it's illegal to have political prisoners as well. I mean, it's just that should be clear. So that's one thing. The second thing is very, very clear, and people never mention it. How did Israel, probably since the days of COVID-19, especially since 2020, escalated in an unprecedented level their actions against the Palestinians in the West Bank? Not only did it tighten the siege on Gaza like never before, but people forget how organically Gaza and the West Bank are connected. And the number of political prisoners, the number of attacks by settlers, the number of children killed by Israel since 2020, the violation of the sacredness of Al-Aqsa since 2020, the discourse about blowing up Al-Aqsa, that suddenly intensified. This was a very important part of this idea that the Hamas said, we warned Israel in 2021 when we launched just only one missile to Jerusalem to tell them you cannot continue. If you remember, people forget May 2021. It was May 2021, Hamas sent a warning to Israel, you are crossing all the red lines. And it was ignored, of course. It was ignored. So that was another objective, to try and stop because everything that happens in the West Bank was relevant to the people who lived in the Gaza Strip. The unknown, and really this was unknown event for very clearly, was this incomprehensible idea of the Israeli police and army to allow hundreds of young Israelis to have a love and peace festival 2 meters from the fence of Gaza. It's very interesting what comes out now. The chief of the police in that area says, I'm not allowing this festival to take place. It's crazy. And the army said, oh, don't worry. We will, not a problem. Nothing would happen. That's okay.